Welcome to this episode of Stacks and Stories, the podcast of the Mississippi Library Commission. Join Jeremy, Elisabeth, and myself, Zach, as we discuss the world of tabletop role-playing games. We get into what classifies a game as a tabletop role-playing game, what it's like to play them, and how you could get involved with local groups in your area. Enjoy. Welcome to Stacks and Stories, the podcast of the Mississippi Library Commission. I am Zach Burton, and I'm joined with two of my co-workers today.
Hey, I'm Elisabeth Scott. I'm a reference librarian here at MLC.
I'm Jeremy Hammock. I'm one of the IT technicians.
And today we are going to be talking about tabletop role-playing games. A little different from a lot of our podcast material, but over the last handful of years I feel like a lot of libraries have been getting materials in for people to have their first experience with games like Dungeons and Dragons. Now I myself am not very familiar with tabletop role-playing games, so Jeremy or Elisabeth, would either of y'all like to kind of give an overview of what someone who had never heard of a tabletop RPG, of what that is?
So, it is a shared storytelling experience with several people who sit around. They create a character, and then the dungeon master or game master takes them through a story or even just a world that they have built.
My usual go-to elevator pitch explanation is, so everybody sits around the table, you're going to tell a story, think like your typical fantasy book or whatever's been decided, but you're in charge of one character and their actions, whereas the dungeon master will kind of facilitate everything else.
What are, could y'all name off some tabletop RPGs, like some popular ones or ones that people play regularly? Or
Dungeons and Dragons, probably the big mainstream one, followed by Pathfinder.
Which is a, like, early D&D, right? It's D&D.
I believe they branched off at 3rd or 3.5.
Right.
And now they're at a 2nd edition. See, we also have Shadowrun, which is kind of like a fantasy meets sci-fi.
Masquerade.
Vampire the Masquerade. There's Lancer is a mech one that's pretty good.
There's Warhammer Fantasy RPG.
Oh yeah.
Which we're about to start.
You're getting a lot of different different series, and or kind of making their own. Like Dragon Age has its own.
Yeah.
I believe there's a Witcher one. I believe there's a Dark Souls.
And then people also build off of the old rule sets. So we've been playing a Star Wars game, but it's based on D&D 5e.
Okay, yeah, so I was about to say, from my limited knowledge of like tabletop role-playing games specifically, is probably just rooted around like Dungeons and Dragons. And so, yeah, could either of y'all talk some about like this evolution of rules? Because as much as I know is that over time, there was originally one rule set.
Right.
And then I don't know if these companies, is it Games Workshop that does? I forget who the publisher is.
Wizards of the Coast.
Wizards of the Coast.
I think Games Workshop did
Warhammer.
Okay.
Yeah, Warhammer.
Yeah. Okay. So I don't know if these publishers, have like a plan to be like, oh, now our new rule set's coming out. As far as y'all know, like, what is the process there? Are these publishers getting feedback from the people buying and playing these products and figuring out how to like perfect this, or do y'all even have any insight to that?
To some extent, you can see some trends. For example, with 4th edition Dungeons and Dragons, a lot of it kind of mirrored some popular games elsewhere, such as like World of Warcraft. And if anything, I seem to remember that being a common complaint about it, is like, ooh, this is looking too much like these video games, not
Yeah.
like its own
Okay.
thing. And then
Because there were big complaints about 4, right?
Yeah.
4E people. I mean, I'm sure some people liked it, but
like it did some things like really well. It like there's a common issue that's called the linear fighter quadratic wizard, where in the beginning the fighter kind of stands out. It's better than the wizard. Wizard is very squishy, but as you progress through the game, the fighter more or less stays the same. They don't get many more abilities. They don't get any. They're kind of just doing the same thing, whereas the wizard gets better and more earth-shattering spells, and so by the end they're more complicated and satisfying than said fighter. But one of the things that 4th edition did well was fix that issue. Fighters, as they progress, got new and interesting abilities that coincided with the spells.
and then now 5E, I think they.
Is that the current?
That's the.
rule set?
It's the sort of the current one. They're I believe still in the play testing phase, or
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Is it called 1D&D? And then I've seen some people call it 5.5.
yeah,
Okay.
it's yeah. I've kind of after Wizards made a lot of questionable choices.
Which
I'll-
made it seem like they weren't listening.
Yes. A lot of people started kind of exploring a lot of other systems,
Yeah.
which has its own merits. But 5th edition, going back to the initial thing about how these different
If they're
editions
kind of-
start.
yeah.
It seemed a lot of the things that it was praised for and a lot of the things that it focused on seemed to be direct responses to the problems with 4th edition, where they were bringing back a lot of how rules and stuff not just worked, but how they even just the language of it, like how
Sure.
4th edition used a lot of very concise, very game kind of language versus previous editions, and then again with 5th edition using a more narrative description for what you can do in your actions,
Sure.
et cetera, et cetera.
So, like I said, I am not. I've maybe played like Dungeons and Dragons maybe 3 times total. So it's not very much, but I do have my own experiences. Playing video games. Grew up playing video games. Loved role playing games. Is it fair to assume? Probably a lot of these systems and mechanisms in role-playing video games are probably taking inspiration or maybe even just kind of like following a schematic of sorts maybe laid out in these tabletop games?
To an extent, because if you were to, the one big benefit that a video game will have, or a video game RPG over a tabletop one, is there's a computer involved, and
Sure.
so a lot of the math stuff you don't have to do. You just push a button and it does things regardless of what's happening behind the scenes.
Sure.
And so you can start doing a lot more complicated stuff. You can make systems. Any tabletop RPG is going to have mechanical limits, because you can pretty much make a system for anything. But somebody's got to come up with that. Then once you're actually playing, somebody's got to have enough of an understanding that they can run it. And it's one of those, you start to get to diminishing returns on like what you're doing. So,
Sure.
and there already is some varying degree. Some people will say that they prefer crunchier systems which are to say more complex, have a lot more math involved. Things aren't as simple, and then you have on the opposite end more narrative focused games. Like one game that I do weekly, we've gone like 3 sessions without ever rolling a dice. We're
Sure.
just role playing in character.
Yeah.
Even with those extremes, going back towards the crunchier, like you're gonna hit a point that you don't need all of those mechanics and stuff. And in a video game, since so much of that is hidden, you can do more. And so that, like a trade-off. So to an extent, yes, a lot of it builds off that, especially with popularity.
Sure. Well, and it sounds like when you mentioned Edition 4, it sounds like now we're probably getting into a place where they are probably influencing each other, or at least I'm taking that assumption because you said Edition 4 had a lot of similarities to like the World of Warcraft games, like mechanics. I'm curious, it sounds like when you sit down to play any tabletop RPG, it kind of sounds like that you have a lot of agency for creativity and a lot of freedom.
I think it all depends on your group.
Really?
I have played games where I felt like I had no agency and we weren't really rolling a lot of dice. It just, the DM really wanted a whole lot of control over what happened in the game. But then, yeah, usually it's just let your imagination run wild.
Well, speaking of the DM, the dungeon master, the game master. So from my limited perspective knowledge, they kind of in this tabletop situation function almost as the computer itself in, say, a video game RPG. You made the comment like, we're not in the video game, dice aren't being rolled, all of these things, but behind the screens in the code, that's happening. So I guess, could y'all talk on like, if someone's wanting to get involved into tabletop role playing, what would being a dungeon master or game master look like? Like, what should someone expect if they're thinking, hey, I want to get involved in this and I want to run a campaign, or like what goes into all of that?
So my group right now, the people trade off being the DM. Someone will have an idea for a game. Oh, I want to run a campaign that's set in a medieval Japan setting, or classic Faerun, which is the Dungeons and Dragons, or whatever, Star Wars. And so then everyone has their own style. We have one guy who, he says he just gets a general idea before each session where we could possibly go. And then he just lets us ride. And if we come up with something that he's not expecting, he'll say, okay, everyone go take a cigarette break. We'll be back in 10 minutes. And then he just kind of lets us go. But then we also have a guy who plans every single thing that he thinks is going to happen in a session. He will plot out our battles. He goes through our inventories and kind of tries to plan as much as he can for ever eventuality, which sounds really, really stressful. But it's what makes him the most comfortable.
Sure.
And then if we get to a point where he can't really go any farther because he hasn't planned for that, well, we just end the session there.
Yeah.
Which is also okay.
Oh yeah. At the end of the day, it's kind of it's a game. You're hanging out with friends, or you're hanging out with strangers possibly. You're just the community aspect.
Sure. Yeah, I was about to say, when we started this, you made the comment, I never thought about this, but you said tabletop role-playing games are kind of like a practice in collective storytelling. Right. And I never thought of it that way, but I think that's such an excellent way to put what you're doing. It's funny you talking about these different approaches to game mastering, dungeon mastering. One of the 3 or 4 times I ever played D&D was with a group of friends who also had never played. and I had played once, so they're like, "Well, you have to be the DM," and I'm like,
Oh.
"Okay, let me look up some basic rules," and then it's I had such little time to prepare. I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna kind of like write a story, and we're really just gonna role play it, and we'll kind of put some of the rules on the back burner. And I realized how quickly you can write a story for people, and all they have to do to get the ball rolling is they got to go through one specific door. And then they just never went through the door.
Right.
And then the next thing I know is I'm having to create a story on the fly and throw out the 3 hours of story work I did the night before. Which I think is, while I was bummed they didn't get to these machinations I had, devised for them, it was a very, just the social aspect of it was very fun and funny, me trying to, clamber.
Sounds like you were all kind of on the same page about things, and I think that's usually where the disconnect happens. If somebody walks away from like, oh, I did not have fun at that.
Sure.
It's usually like, okay, we had like more than one set of expectations on like what was to happen.
Sure. So that sounds like you'd want to make sure for someone getting into D&D maybe, or any tabletop role-playing game, maybe they want to be in a group of people who are all kind of on the same page of like what to expect from the experience.
Yeah. I usually you have a lot less people that are eager to dungeon master than to play, which is kind of to be expected. But anytime I have talked with somebody that's like, ooh, I really want to get it, try to dungeon master, game master, whatever, I usually suggest, okay, you need to find some newbies to the game. Because a lot of people's instinct is to find somebody that they know the rules, and sure, that might be helpful to have someone there who knows the rules maybe a little bit better, or I wouldn't even say that necessarily, just someone that you feel confident that they're there, or with them there.
Sure.
But other than that, all new players, because you can all be new at the thing together, and that's a hard feeling to recreate outside of that. The whole the first time that I dungeon master, I remember convincing just a bunch of people at a pizza place to hey, come over Sunday, we'll have tacos, and it was wild. And I definitely messed up so many things, but we all had fun.
Sure.
One of our best campaigns was I think we had a regular game that had just fallen apart, so a bunch of us were still really new. And so we did a homebrew campaign where we followed the 5E rules, but every week someone else would do a different session in the game. And so, and it was sort of a monster of the week sort of thing, but you'd keep on with the same general gist of where the storyline was going. There were a lot of really special items that were given out, just way overpowered, that we didn't have any, a bag of holding? You want a bag of holding? Let's see what I can do. And then, by the end of the session, there would be one. But it was so much fun. It was a blast.
I know earlier I asked if someone was wanting to get into this and was curious about being a game master, what they should expect. Alternatively, for people that have never played a tabletop role-playing game, or let's say they've never played a role-playing game in general, and they were curious, what should they expect on their first session, or what should they expect as far as a character creation or any of these things?
I would stress to not worry about the mechanics as much, and the characters, whatever part you have of that, their backstory to some extent, the narrative, their goals, motivation, that kind of stuff. Because honestly, the character sheet is more of just we need to quantify things because this is a game,
sure,
and everything, and that can be learned real easy. But having a character that you find interesting, that you want to play, that is going to carry you a lot further than just how do I do this. And so like some people, their idea of fun is to like, how do I make the best character for this and all that, and that's fine too.
Sure.
To the listeners, I'm rolling my eyes right now at I want to make the best character ever.
I mean, hey, it's not me.
That just drives me crazy. Is it the min-maxers, ones who just want the perfect character,
strongest warrior.
Right? And what's the point? I mean, sure, in your standard story, you might have the hero who has no faults, but I prefer to have a little bit of wiggle room where someone has maybe a couple of faults.
Yeah, I would much rather have a really like a underpowered character, but I know what they want and I like I know what to do with them, than have I can literally take anything in a fight, but I don't know why are they here?
Yeah. But I can't talk because I don't have any points in intelligence.
Ooh.
Well, going again back to your comment, the collective storytelling aspect of it. When you're reading a book, you want characters that if you read a book and the main character is, I think for instance, like a character really hard to write interestingly is Superman, because as far as this idea of like combat or these things that people are drawn to in like action adventure stories, like he doesn't really have an equal. And so then the writers for Superman, to make him interesting, they have to find these other ways to tell that story. Yeah. But I feel like when you have when you're playing a more grounded character, that's like a more everyman in whatever universe you're existing in.
Every dwarf.
Every dwarf, every elf, whatever it may be. I think it's much more interesting from a storytelling perspective, and like you said, if it's a collective storytelling experience, that sounds like that's a much more fun.
Yeah, I will say on the point though, maybe you could say it's a place that it does differ from, say, a book or a novel or series or whatever.
Sure.
That it is something that you're doing, you're putting on. I am this character, and so then you start getting into the escapism of it. And some people, min-maxer or otherwise, they've been doing the daily grind all week at work, and now they're just I just want to kill some goblins.
Kind of like a little an escapist power fantasy of sorts. Yeah.
I mean, this narrative wise, maybe not as interesting, but
sure.
They're.
Doesn't mean it's not fun.
Even if we're playing the same system, we're just not playing the same game is all.
Sure.
Is a lot of the way that I view it.
Sure.
If all you want to do is just smash things, if that's all you want to do, then you might be happier playing Call of Duty or something similar.
Sure.
Because if all you're doing is going around and whapping things and you're not interacting with your party at all, it makes it less fun for everyone else.
Sure.
But you can have a character who's very good at whapping, who isn't smart, and still gets along with the whole party.
Yeah.
So it's just...
Well, it almost sounds like more so you're describing just making sure that the people involved in a session in a group are willing to just for lack of a better way to put it, to play with each other, to get in that space together and actually inhabit it together and not just be trying to do their own thing within the session.
A lot of people will kind of refer, I guess in a more general term, or general context, the social contract of the game. We're all here playing this together, and it's almost like a don't yuck another person's yum sort of thing.
Sure.
But at the same time, you also hear the term session zero thrown out, which is basically everyone gets together as if we're going to do a session, but you go through things like that and hey, this is going to be the tone of the game. This is what we're actually running. These are sort of how to gear the characters, and a lot of it is to kind of minimize issues like that.
Sure.
Right.
Everybody knows what they're getting into together. Everybody's coming to an agreement, and sort of it's a good space to work out.
Sure.
In my experience, most of those become like, okay, we spent 15 minutes on this, let's play.
Yeah. You realize you're all on the same page, obviously,
Right.
and want to get into it.
Those usually are more like what do they call it? The like official things that they'll do.
Adventures?
Adventures League, yeah. Something like that, where you're meeting up to play, but you have like no idea who these people are.
Oh,
So
okay.
Which I have also done.
Have you?
Yes. And we met some
Oh, yeah.
winners and not winners. So,
I've met both of those kinds of people.
but yeah, we used to go to a comic shop, Vans.
Yep.
So, and met some good people and stole them and brought them back to
That's
our
what you
house.
do with people like that.
Yes, yes. So, and we had a lot of good time together, and that was we didn't really see them outside of D&D. That was our connection.
Yeah, every Friday I meet with the group online. I just met them through Reddit. We were just looking to play D&D, and became super close friends. And like I see them every Friday, and that's it. That's our interaction. Maybe a message here or there throughout the week or something, but it's usually a meme reminded us of something from the game.
Are y'all on Discord together?
Yep.
Or okay.
I think, let's see, one's in Alaska, one's in Pennsylvania. I think one of them's in Tennessee, and then there's like 2 others that I'm not sure where they are. Somewhere out there, I hope.
I want to sing that song from American Tail now, but I won't.
Let's say I'm a listener and I hear this, and I am suddenly dying to get myself involved in a tabletop RPG campaign. What should I do? What's the best avenue to try to find people that are interested, or to find the resources I need to learn about it or get involved? Or
This might be the excellent point for us to drop in our library plug, because libraries have started D&D groups that more and more in the last few years since it's become so popular. So I know Central Miss has a group. I think Madison does. Did you say you?
I used to. I got one set up in Columbus back when about the time shortly after 5th edition dropped, around 2015,
Right.
I believe, and that went on until the pandemic. We changed venues a few times just because of other library needed space for other things.
Right.
But yeah, no, they were very welcoming, and it was a great space for a variety of people. We had people that hadn't played since the 80s. We had parents coming in with their kids to like show them, different groups of teenagers. It was a whole spectrum of people and experiences, and yeah, it was a great space. But yeah.
So that's definitely one. And then, so if you're ask at your library, and if they don't have anything, you can also do what I did and go to your local comic book shop. And then you can also do what Jeremy did and go on Reddit.
Brave the internet.
Were you on the D&D subreddit?
I was on a few different subreddits, and it had the anxiety/intensity of job hunting, but because people will have like forms to fill out for their games, and it was wild. I spent a whole week of just like constantly checking like phone and email, and then I get a response from something, and I'm like, I'm scared to read it, but I also
Oh wow, I can't imagine being vetted for a game.
Oh, it's wild. Yeah, no, and I've had one. And like anything on the internet, you got to be careful, because there was one group that I got in, and it was like, my phone started blowing up because they invited me to Discord. Okay, cool. And then phone's blowing up, and it's like 2 in the afternoon. And I'm like, none of these people working? I'm like, oh, these are high schoolers. I'm out. And
Great.
yeah. And then, but they'll have questions like, what is your experience with this? Like, they'll have scales of like, you know, from 1 to 5, being from combat to role play. Like, where do you fall? If you were going to be in this game, and they'll have, before you've ever like opened the form, there's like a 3-page document on like what the setting is and what all that's going to be. And it's like, okay, like describe the character you would want to play, kind of thing, which drives me nuts, because I very much like to make characters off of interesting story threads with like the setting thing. Great, I'll find something there and build something off of that, but I also want to do something with my fellow players, you know, like what would be interesting to play in tandem with them.
In my last few games, we've actually started to, a lot of times with a 0 session or a first session, they'll have, oh, everyone meets in a bar, or, you know, oh, you all meet in front of the jobs wanted list at the local adventuring league. But we've recently started to have connections with other players. So when you start the game, and one that we're playing now, my husband and I play 2 characters that got together 10 years ago and have been traveling around, you know, just taking odd jobs. And then in one we're about to start playing, the Warhammer Fantasy. Another guy and I, we're dwarf brother and sister.
Nice.
So, you know, and I like that, you know, we already have something, and then you just have to meet the rest of the party.
Yeah. I think the best one of those I've had was this one guy and I, we were like identical twins, but he inherited the sorcerer power. So he got magic from birth, basically. And so my character ended up becoming like a wizard, because I was like jealous. So he studied for his magic.
I like that.
Yeah. And it had some great dynamics, but yeah, the connections, that's really helpful. Even if it's just like one other person, it's very nice, because you have someone. I feel like you have at least one person that you feel like you already have some built-in connect. Like, you don't have to like try to meet everybody and try to figure out how is my character gonna admit anything.
Right. Right.
And trust them.
You know, one thing I want to throw out that has been of the few memories I've had in my time of doing tabletop role-playing games, as far as the creative and collective storytelling involved, is a friend of mine, one of the times we played, was like a halfling thief or something. But he decided for a character trait he had to just be a kleptomaniac. And so because of that, he tried to steal from everyone we met. And so suddenly we're a part of this, you know, adventurers group or whatever, and everyone that we met hated us because of our little friend who could not keep his hands out of other people's pockets. And it was both terrible and also so much fun. So I've also I'm aware of the rule of cool, or rule as written. I've heard people talk about as far as tabletop goes. Can y'all dive into that concept a little?
So rules as written would be like following the rules to the T, like however it says. It's one of those, like, somebody has decided to do this really epic thing in possibly like a dire situation, and then they following the mechanics, they're rolling this particular stat to do whatever, but they roll bad. And so this what would have been this great moment creatively or just heroically, however it would have been, it just can't, because according to the rules, they have failed this. And so that would be following as rules is written, or an example of that. Rule of cool would be like the dungeon master saying like, no, this is cool, I like this. Like, let's go ahead and go with it. Don't worry about rolling it. Or
sure.
Something like that.
So kind of like pitting, being more interested in like the technicality, the rule side of it versus the kind of narrative storytelling aspect of it.
And I've seen dungeon masters that are like, they'll tell you up front, like, if you can tell me an interesting way of you're doing this, we won't have to roll for it.
Yeah.
So something like that. Can be a bargaining thing. It kind of depends.
Sure.
And in my experience, it's one of those. It's better as like a garnish, if that makes sense. If you start, I've had it before where it kind of becomes the mercy of what the dungeon master thinks will be cool.
Yeah.
And then it can feel like, okay, like, so we're not really using these rules. But that's an extreme. That's
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But I would much prefer my DM fudge things. Like if they're rolling behind their screen, they're probably not telling you everything that happens, which is good. But, when it comes to the technicalities of, I have a bow in one hand and I have a sword in another, and, it takes half an action to resheath my sword, and that can get a little frustrating, and usually our DMs will just work with us to, well, you can just drop your sword, you can come back and pick it up, or whatever.
Well, it sounds like in a lot of ways tabletop RPGs can kind of be what you make of them. It sounds if you want to come to it for this kind of very technical game, you can. Mm-hmm. It seems like also if you are just kind of looking for like a space to be creative and imaginative, that you can also curate those types of spaces for it. Which really just sounds like a pretty all-inclusive style of game for people to get involved in. And like we've said, libraries would be an excellent place for people to start looking to see if there may be groups. Some libraries may even have materials and resources to get you started.
Can we throw that in, that the Library Commission does have several of the guidebooks? We have the DM's Guide, the Monster Manual, the Player's Handbook, and there's one more that's kind of four.
I would say those are the three big ones, but then after that, the Xanathar's Guide of Everything has some additional subclasses. Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, more subclasses.
I think we have those too.
Yeah, those are the ones.
And then I think we got a couple of the pre-formatted modules. Like I think we got Candlekeep because it's a library.
Yeah. And that would be like it's Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, and it's like a pre-made adventure where whoever would be running it is more or less using it versus coming up with their own thing.
Sure.
Though most kind of add their own spin to it.
Sure.
Not just in style, but also own material and things.
Yeah. So it sounds like we have plenty of materials here at the Mississippi Library Commission to get you started.
Definitely.
So you could come here and check them out from us directly, or go to your local public library and see about borrowing them from us. In the last couple of years, I've noticed a huge uptick in tabletop role-playing media. Podcast, YouTube channels.
Critical Role.
Yeah, Critical Role. I think Dimension 20. Adventure Zone. I'm trying to throw out some I'm somewhat aware of. And with all of these, this kind of growth in the, in interest in these tabletop role-playing games, I've also heard people mention the Mercer effect. Are either of you familiar with that? And if so, could you speak on it?
Well, you see, there is this voice actor named Matthew Mercer. He voices your favorite character. And he is a fantastic dungeon master, leading the Critical Role group. And the Mercer effect is essentially like new dungeon master or veteran, sees sort of what he does, bringing his professional voice acting ability in there, and he's got 50 different or very distinct characters with very distinct everything, and he's making crazy sound effects that you swear there's got to be a soundboard hidden back there or something, and it kind of becomes this like, ooh, but I can't do that. Mm-hmm. Like that's I'm not a voice actor, and it's one of those. It's not a thing to get hung up on. Like again, this is a game that you're playing with friends, or it's just a game. Like, and you're having fun. And like me personally, I do almost zero like funny voices for characters.
Oh, really?
I have like maybe 2 that I can do, and I have to like. I can't say that. I have a lot of energy has to go into working myself up to them.
Okay.
So
I like to give my characters some sort of thing so that I can sort of get back into character when we start again, because comparing it to a collective storytelling, if you haven't read your book for a couple of weeks and then you go back, you have to kind of try to remember what's going on. So if I can slip back into my fake German accent or my squeaky voice, then it helps me zone in. Are they perfect? Oh no. They're not perfect at all. And sometimes we don't even do it the whole game. It'll just be enough to kind of get everyone in the mood.
In the same way that you wouldn't like say every single thing that your character has said all day long.
Right.
You don't have to put on the accent every time, just enough to like get that little feel of.
Well, it seems like just the gist of it is to have fun.
To
to enjoy yourself and to like be willing to inhabit a space of playfulness, to push this kind of communicative like a story along.
Yes.
Well, are there any last thoughts y'all would like to share on tabletop RPGs, or any advice y'all would like to give to newcomers?
There's no such thing as a one-shot. That's it. No explanation.
This is true. I agree. I mean, you can keep track of everything, but do you really want to?
All right. Well, you heard it here first on Stacks and Stories, the MLC podcast. If you're interested in getting involved in playing tabletop role-playing games, contact us here at the Mississippi Library Commission or reach out to your local public library. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Stacks and Stories, the podcast of the Mississippi Library Commission. We hope you will tune in next time, and we encourage you to visit your local public library often.